Coming to you from an undisclosed location, somewhere deep in the heart of the Santa Monica Mountains, I am your intrepid host, L.A. Marzulli. Welcome to a very special show. I was on a interview with Tom Clark, and we're talking about the 7 mountains of influence that's in our culture. And the first one was media, the second one is family, and we're going to be showing them right here. So we'll get into that, but first a word from our trusted sponsor. Let me ask you something. If you built up $100,000 or more in investments, do you really want all of it riding on the stock market? Think about it. Banks, billionaires, even entire countries are loading up on physical gold and silver. Why? Because when markets swing, real assets hold their value. That's why I want to tell you about Noble Gold Investments. They make it simple to own investments-grade gold and silver, the same kind the big players are buying. And you can actually hold it in your hand or put it safely in your retirement account. You've worked hard to build your wealth. Isn't it time you protected it? Noble Gold is family-owned, trusted by thousands, and ranked #1 in gold IRAs 4 years in a row. Their precious metal specialists are standing by to answer your questions and walk you through every step. Simple, safe, easy. Visit noblegoldinvestments.com today. That's noblegoldinvestments.com. It's time to protect what you built. Folks, gold right now is at an all-time high, $34.91. $3,491 as of September 1st, 2025. Peggy and I invested in it a few years ago. I am really glad we did. Once again, that's noblegoldinvestments.com, noblegoldinvestments.com. Tell them you heard it from L.A. Marzulli. Thank you. Thanks for watching, folks. Really appreciate it. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already done that, and consider becoming a member. Right next to the subscribe button is a little white button that says join. Become a member. You get 10% off on everything in our store. Plus, you get the monthly news magazine completely free. And then, of course, you get members-only content. And you help do what we do every day, single day. Don't wait for YouTube to send you a notification that here's another show from LA. We do a show every single day. Thank you for your patronage. Thank you for coming here. The Lord redirected our steps. We are growing something here. Lots of information. Our hand is on the plow. Do I believe we're going up in the rapture September 23rd? Absolutely not. Am I expectant? Sure, I'm expectant. But I'm also expectant every day. I hope, because you can't fix this anymore. We can't fix what's here. You can't put AI back in the box. You just can't do that. So we're in a window of time which is absolutely unprecedented in all of history. So here's my interview with Tom Clark. I think you'll find it interesting, and we're going to use this to basically, there'll be 7 installments of this. So this will be for the first 2 installments. They are media and family, and just how the Luciferian agenda has influenced the media, how it has influenced the family structure, and I think you'll find it interesting. I'll be back. I'll weigh in very quickly at the end. Thanks so much for watching.
Father's Heart with Tom Clark, better known as Papa Tom.
Hello, this is Papa Tom of the Father's Heart Talk Show. And we're here today doing the second part of a 7-part series with L.A. Marzulli from Santa Monica, California, one of the world's leading experts on the Nephilim. And the 7-part series is dealing with the 7 mountains of influence. The first one we did was on media, and today we're going to address the subject of family. Family is God's ideal. We talk about fathers and children, fathers and wives, and fathers and mothers and children, and so forth. The whole concept of family is God's idea. And it's interesting how the most basic social unit of any community starts with the family. And so it should be no surprise that it's the enemy's attempt to destroy the family. From the top down, the bottom up, you can destroy the society if you can destroy the family. And so we're going to address the family issues today in America, and how this spirit of the Nephilim has integrated, infiltrated, permeated the family with the intent of destroying that. I want to mention one statistic before we get started, and that is that I read a few months back interesting statistic that said that in the households in America today, maybe say 2020, 2025, a couple of years back, there was only 35% of households in America were a nuclear family. They defined a nuclear family as a father, a mother, and at least one child. 35%. I mean, 65% of the households in America do not have a father and mother together with a child, or even a father and mother, for that matter. So with that in mind, LA, why don't you start talking into or speaking into this issue of how the Nephilim spirit, which is the spirit of Antichrist, has infiltrated the unit of the family, which is God's idea, and has successfully actually destroyed it in many cases.
Well, first of all, Tom, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. And thank you, folks, for watching our 7-part series here. It's an honor to be here. But here's the deal: when communism took over Russia, 1917, the Bolsheviks, toppled the Tsar, and the rest is history. Just to give you an idea, just what happens when the commies get in, they create gulags. Read the Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. I read that decades ago and was appalled at the figures. He put it at 63 million people just disappeared in the gulags and they were never seen again. Because that's what happens. You take God out of the equation, which is exactly what the communists did. There is no God. It's the opiate of the masses, right?
Religion, yes.
And then you get 63 million dying in the gulags. Entire families were split up. The communists went after the family like you can't even believe. And they created government schools, they deconstructed the family, and they created the modern Soviet Union. Okay. They are still reeling from the decades of communist rule, even though the whole system collapsed. Basically, like a house of cards. Why? Because it doesn't work. And then you get these guys in our Congress who are trying to tell us that socialism somehow works, and it's never really been tried. Bernie Sanders tried. Excuse me, Bernie. It's been tried. It doesn't work because there's no incentive. Here's the deal. And before I get into the family, just let me give your audience a perspective here of why we enjoy what we enjoy in modernity in the modern world. It's not taught in the schools. It's not. There's a complete disconnect in the churches. No one ever talks about this. Where did the elevator come from? Where did modern day skyscrapers come from? Who invented the automobile? Who invented the telegraph? Who invented the television? Who invented the thermostat? Where did air conditioning come from? Who invented refrigeration? Who invented the railroad? Who invented the telegraph? You want me to continue? Because I can. And I can go on it all comes from one place. It's a Eurocentric, mostly American inventions. That's where it's from. That's where it's from. And why did it happen here and not over in the Soviet Union? Why did it happen here in America and not in other places? And you could say, and I'm going to be called a racist here. What did Mexico contribute to the modern era? What did Peru contribute to modernity? What did the Arab nations contribute to modernity? What did the Chinese contribute to modernity? What did Africa contribute to modernity? I just listed a portion of those inventions that came from America. Why and how did it come from America? First of all, the family unit was intact. People had a mother and a father. Second of all, for the first time in history, people had liberty to do what they wanted to do.
That's it.
That's first. Orville and Wilbur Wright had a bicycle shop. They bicycles. But guess what? On the weekend, they're out there tinkering with motors and things and paper and canvas and all this stuff. And they invent the airplane because they have liberty to do so. And that's, the family unit now in modernity has been eradicated for the most part in this country. And it's by design, because you eradicate that and then people grow up in this brokenness. And how do you get healed from that? Many of these inventors, not all, came from good, solid Christian background. And people can take issue with that. I'm painting with a broad brush here. But the family unit was intact. We had a culture. And of course, all this now is bad by the left and the woke generation. Excuse me, it doesn't work and it never will. So we are looking at the attempt by the left to deconstruct the family and then tell us that somehow two mommies are okay or two men are okay. No, it's not. That's not God's design. But it's all by their design. Take God out of the school. And by the way, folks, if your kids are in public school, get them out of public school and think twice about sending them to college because they're indoctrinated in colleges. They're not taught critical thinking. They're indoctrinated. How do we know? We have a daughter that went to college and it flipped her whole paradigm just like that. Just like
We'll get into education in one of the other parts. But that's true. Wasn't it the author de Tocqueville in the 1800s came to America and he said that the strength of America was in the fact that everywhere he went in America, he saw churches and he saw that the people were devoted to God. So it's that connection with God that the American spirit, I'd call it, the spirit of America was always connected to God from the very beginning. And that's why America always wanted to be free. That's why our founding fathers, all the documents, we boil down all the documents, the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, it's all about freedom. That was all what it was designed to do, was to give people free, regular liberty. They're both almost consonant words to each other.
yeah, they're kissing cousins. They go together. Absolutely.
I think somebody once said liberty was something to be free of something, and then freedom was to be free of something, and then liberty was the ability free to do something. You were free to do something as opposed to be free for something.
Exactly.
It's both interact with each other. So freedom and liberty there. And if you go back to the Bible, which I think we always do in the show, if you look at Luke 4, when Jesus started his ministry, he quoted from Isaiah 61. And he talked in Isaiah 61 about setting the captives free. And he mentions the word liberty twice there. And it's in the heart of God that his children be free. It's in the heart of Satan that his children not be free. If you look at all the powers and principalities of evil we talked about before to control us, he controls us through fear. We mentioned that before in our last show. It's absolutely true. He controls us through fear, but the objective of making us afraid is to taking our freedom away from us. And we're looking at that particular unit of the family now and how he basically took apart the family piece by piece. You're exactly right with 1917. You roll the clock forward to the 1960s, there was a women's movement, National Organization of Women. It was run by a woman named Mallory Malott, and she started the feminist movement. And the feminist movement was actually from Russia. It was communist infiltration that influenced the feminist movement. There were wrongs being experienced by women. God bless women. God bless. I love my daughters. I love my granddaughters even more than my daughters, I think. And I want them to be free. I don't want them to be feminists, because the concept of feminist is emasculating men. And if you emasculate men, boys do not become men, and men don't become fathers. And if men don't become fathers, you're not going to have a family. The family doesn't exist. I was watching my wife spend some time with Sanctity of Life, which is a Christian organization dealing with the abortion industry, pro-life actually. And they're trying to help women decide not to have abortions. And one of the studies that was done was saying that came out that in 90% of the cases, a woman would not have an abortion if the father of the child wanted it.
There you go.
And I think the focus really on abortions and pro-life shouldn't be on the woman. I think the focus of pro-life should be on the man, and not specific man, but specifically the father. The biological father of that child to stand up for his child's life. Say, I want my child. He doesn't care what the doctor says. Doesn't care what I shouldn't say he doesn't care what the mother says, but the point is the father's position before God in the family. He has the right. He has the authority. It's his metro. The family is the father's metro. And God puts the father in charge of the family to protect it, to provide it, and to mentor, teach the children that come from that family unit. And so, and God's given the responsibility to the man. And if the man exercises his divine authority, he can say, I want my child. And no one has a greater authority over that child. Not even, I would even say, not even the mother, even though she's carrying the baby. In God's eyes, the authority belongs to the man. When the man does not, when the father does not take his rightful position on that family unit with the abortion issue, which we're going to go into further in the next segment, but you have an execution, basically, of this evil thought coming through communism that the woman has a right to her body. I mean, the whole abortion thing came in the feminist movement. They said, throw your bodies at men, be very promiscuous, use sex to control men, and then do not, whatever you do, don't have babies. Abort the babies. So, you have sex with all sorts of men, and different connections with the men, but it was without any intent, and I should say that way, with a specific intent of destroying the family. Feminism movement was there. And we'll be back in a moment with L.A. Marzulli, and we'll share with you the rest of part 2, the family. We're back with L.A. Marzulli, and we're discussing the powers and principalities of evil. The Antichrist spirit, which expresses itself with the Nephilim spirit, has been desecrating and taking apart, piece by piece, the family over the last 100 years or so. And we were last talking about the issue of feminism and how the inroads that feminism in America in the 1960s happened. By the way, Mallory Millette, who started the National Organization of Women and this whole concept, used to chant at dinner. And they had 25 premises that they chanted. And they started in Brooklyn, New York, of all places, and ended up in Berkeley, out in California. These are women that didn't, shave. They didn't shave under their arms. They didn't basically behave as women who would normally in society behave historically before that. And they were literally hell-bent on getting power and control over men. That was the whole issue behind this. And to the extent that they were successful in doing that, they emasculated men, which took men out of their positions of being fathers, which pretty much destroyed the family, at least in 65% of the cases.
We have something now that we're being told, toxic masculinity. Well, what's toxic masculinity? We're told that being a little boy, running around and doing all this stuff on the playground, somehow that's bad. So everything is being shifted. The whole transgender movement comes in. I just read an article on Spirit Daily, actually, which is very interesting. And the article said, how do family members deal with someone who's transitioning? Now, that's a whole other subject.
Sure.
But once again, I mean, you watch that person disappear, because they disappear. Let's say your brother comes up and starts transitioning into a woman. Well, he's no longer your brother. He's not. And you'll watch him fade. That's what the article talked about.
Sure.
So we have toxic masculinity. We have this dumbing down of the male persona and what a man is supposed to be. Who are our role models? When I was a kid, it was the Lone Ranger. What's better than the Lone Ranger for a role model for a little boy? I loved him. John Wayne, a little over the top, but rough and tumbled cowboy. I mean, I get that. That's a little on the nose, a little over the top, as it were. But the Lone Ranger to me was absolutely incredible. I mean, just incredible. All that's gone. It's all been desecrated. And now, what is our role model? What does a little boy look up to? Spider-Man? I mean, seriously, guys? So, the feminization of the male persona has certainly taken place in America. And before we continue, we were talking about feminism, and there's always a push and a pull. So why did this movement happen? Because women were subjugated by men and looked at as second-class citizens, and they never were supposed to be that.
Of course, it's wrong. It was wrong.
It was completely wrong.
No.
And, they weren't allowed to vote. They were second-class citizens. I mean, in many, many countries, we'll start naming countries, women are treated like chattel even today in 2025. I will actually mention one country. No, I won't either. There's no point in getting into it. But, you know, women can be burned at the stake. They can be killed at a whim by their husband. Well, you know, you don't see that here. You don't see that happening in America because we've changed. We've righted some of the things that were wrong. Slavery was a black mark, no pun intended, on this country. Are we still dealing with the fallout from that? Absolutely. Are all black people equal? Well, you know, supposedly they are, right? But here's a perfect example in the black community. You know, fathers, because there is no role model, because they come from slavery, because all they've known is this fractured family deal, because they come from it. And, you know, slavery is only it's not that long ago, folks.
That's right.
You know, it really isn't. You know, the
Well,
Civil War
slavery in
dates.
America is not that. There's thousands of years in history, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, you know, 140, 150 years we had it in this country.
Yeah.
We came over in 1898. So I had nothing to do with any of this stuff. Our family, nothing to do with slavery, nothing to do with what happened to the Native American First Nation people. All these things are really wrong with our culture, and we tried to right them, didn't we? So the idea that, you know, the suffragette, the women finally getting a right to vote in the workplace, you know, I remember in the 60s, you know, the whole idea of feminism, right?
Right.
And, you know, the women were going to show us who was boss, and they were going to be construction workers and run jackhammers and machinery and all this stuff. You know, I've been out in California now since 1974. I've seen one woman. She was a Finnish carpenter. She's really good. It's great. Go for it. You know, but that's it. One woman in like over 50 years of being here in construction. And there are others. And I mean, I get that. Remember that whole thing when women were trying to be, you know, join the fire department. Some of that has just fallen of its own weight because, you know, look, I've been married for 41 years this September 23rd. All right. I realize there's such a huge difference between myself and my wife. She is wired completely differently than I am. I am wired completely differently than she is. I'm painting again with a broad brush, but women are different than men, and men are different than women. And this is why God put us together.
That's right. God created us that way.
But here's the deal. Here's the deal. And it's, you know, the church doesn't teach this enough. We are to love our wives as Christ loved the church. And if we did that, there would be no feminist movement.
That's true.
Because, right? There wouldn't be, because women are being
There would be no need for it.
absolutely, there would be no need for it. But the church fails, and these men walk around like, well, she's not submitting to me. Well, the question is this: are you loving your wife as Christ loved the church? But if you love your wife as Christ loved the church, your wife will automatically submit to you because she's being loved, and she knows that. She knows that, and she will follow that lead. But if you're sitting there, or I'm sitting there, demanding blah 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 blah, let me just tell you one story. So we've been married 41 years. So my wife Peggy will get an idea, and she'll want to run with it, you know, without and and she'll start getting a little uppity about it. And I just look at her and I say, let me ask you something. In 41 years, have I ever said no to you? Have I ever denied you anything that you've asked for? And she'll like, and think about it for like a minute or two. And she'll hang her head and go, okay, you're right. Because I never have. And I'm not saying I'm a perfect husband. I'm not. I come from a very loud, boisterous, in your face Italian family where people yelled and screamed at each other, which is why when I watch some of these goofy movies, I can't watch them because they're triggers for me. They're triggers. And I go, I don't want that in my life. I renounce that in Jesus' name. That's what I was raised in, but I don't have to carry that into my family, into my marriage, and into my persona. So I've sort of distanced myself from all of that. But if we loved our wives as Christ loved the church, there would be no need for feminism. If we loved our wives as Christ loved the church, and we were models of that, and we learned how to stand as a man. I mean, who teaches you how to become a man anymore? I mean,
Well, that's the point. There is no role model there to become a man
anymore.
in the ghettos, I suppose, the communities that around a lot of the cities, the depressed areas. 85% of the families there have no father.
There you go. So who's the role model?
Right.
I mean, there is none. You go on YouTube and you see some gangster, that's got, gold chains and he's got a bit fancy car and all this stuff, and that's your role model. Well, maybe if I deal drugs, it'll all be cool. Maybe if I join a gang, it'll be. And this is why the whole gang thing happens. The whole gang thing happens because there is no family unit. It's all been completely torn down. So the gang becomes the family.
That's right.
Because they've never had the love. I remember when I was down in Mexico. This is circa 1973, 74. I'm with the Guru. And it was my first, we were down in El Paso doing some gig there with the 56-piece orchestra, okay? And we went across the border to Juarez. I will never forget this, Tom, as long as I live. This kid came up to me, 16, 17, and he speaks English, and he goes, "Hey, man, I can give you my sister. I'll give her to you for $20. You want my sister? She's a virgin." I sat there just kind of going like, my jaw on the ground going like, where am I? Who are these people? What is this? This permeates a lot of the Latino community. And this is why people become, the men become gang members, because they have no role model. And, the families are torn apart and all this other stuff. And the gang becomes their family.
Well, in reality, they say they have a role model, but the role model is false. It's the leader of the gang is the role model.
Right.
And that's switches,
Yeah.
So, you're exactly right. These things are infiltrating our society. We mentioned the feminism movement before, and that also led into, by the way, the abortion movement. And this whole concept of Roe versus Wade and all that story, which we don't go into too much detail with that, except for the point that the enemy wanted children to be sacrificed to himself. So he had to take the fathers out of the families so the fathers would not stand in the way. It's the same thing that goes on over and over again, the way we don't understand how evil intelligence thinks. Evil intelligence wants to destroy us and wants to control us. Doesn't want more than 500 million people on the earth, Malthusian doctrine, and he wants to control the 500 million that are there. So the best way to do that is to take the fathers out. Take the fathers out, family collapses. The father doesn't stand for the right of his children to live, right? The children doesn't live. It's also interesting how they do this even in our food that we eat. They're reducing the testosterone in the food that we eat so that the male drive to even have sex declines so that they won't have babies. I mean, it's a phenomenon that's happening in our world, in our country. How young people are not forming these marriage relationships.
They're afraid, and they're afraid to, and this is why people are getting married later and later and later, having children later and later and later.
Living with their parents.
All by design.
All by design. Exactly. My two youngest sons, one's 30, one's 33, they can't find women who, and from their perspective, are Christian. They would like them to be conservative, but want to have children, want to have a family. They can't find them. They've been, at their age. So we'll be back again in the next segment, which will talk further about the inroads that the enemy's made and what God is going to do through the return of the fathers to overtake that. By the way, the positive thing I want to lead to towards the end of the session is the return of the fathers and how God is making an appeal to fathers to come back, to take a stand for their child in the case of these bringing back the fathers back into the family units, and if that, to the extent that that's successful. Now, I know we've had conversations before that nothing's really going to overturn everything until the Lord returns. I get that, but the point is that's not an individual responsibility. And I'm going to remind you of the story I'll tell when it starts again about this little boy. Let me start with this.
Papa Tom.
We are discussing part 2 of the 7-part series with L.A. Marzulli about the family. And I wanted to bring up, of the break, I happened to think about the story because a lot of the things that we talk about in the show and we're going to be talking about in the 7-part series, are a lot of negative things that seems like almost impossible to overcome the things that powers and principalities have done through all these 7 mountains of influence. Now, I remember the story that I think I would like to share with my audience, and I would like to share with LA. I'm sure he remembers the story because it's an encouraging story. The story is about a young boy who's about 10 years old. He's walking along this beach, and the beach is very broad and wide. And he sees these hundreds of thousands, maybe 1 million starfish on the beach. And they're all dying because they can't reach the water. So the little 10-year-old boy runs to the starfish, picks it up, and throws it back in the water. There's another way, throws it back in the water. And as he's walking along the beach, throwing this back in the water, a man comes by. And he looks at this young boy. He says, "Hey, son," he says, "what are you doing?" He says, "Well, these starfish are dying. And I don't want to see them die, so I'm throwing them back in the water so they'll live again." And the older man says to the 10-year-old boy, he says, "Son, what are you doing? Are you crazy?" He says, "There's millions of starfish." He says, "How could you possibly make a difference?" The little 10-year-old boy runs up to another starfish, throws it back into the seas. It made a difference to that one. And the things that we're going to talk about have to do is, yeah, we may not be able to change the whole world all at once, but our responsibility is only one person at a time. If one person is listening to this show and begins to say, "I want to be the man God called me to be. I want to be a father. I want to have a father's heart," or I'm drawn to that. Even if I want to just receive the love that God the Father has for me, I want to take the steps that God wants me to take, just in my life, one step at a time. LA, you're taking the steps in your life. I'm trying to take the steps in my life. I've got children. I got grandchildren. They're all affected, a rippling effect. I can only affect the things that are personal to me. And that's, I think, the things we want to share. Yes, they're negative in the macro, but in the micro, what can we do? What's the steps that we can take? What's the thoughts we can think? What's the prayers we can think? And what's the action steps we can take that will affect the world one starfish at a time?
And you know what? A lot of people are broken. Many men and many women are very, very broken because of their upbringing. And the sin, it can be generational. It just travels down, and people never get any help. And without bringing things into the light, this is where Jesus really comes in, because he came in, my life 45 years ago. I was a completely broken man who had no idea of how to live, how to be a man, how to do anything, because I wasn't taught anything. My father was in World War II, and he came back. He was completely shell-shocked, never got any help. He married a woman who was molested by her uncle, and she never got any help. So there's 2 broken people trying to raise my brother and I, and these people don't have a clue. So my point is, at 18, I left the house and never came back. And I'm just using myself as an example. In my brokenness, when I came to the Lord at 30 years old, the Lord began to heal and restore that brokenness. I'll be 75 in December. I wish I could go back and relive my time as a father. I would change so much, but I was so broken. I'll just give you one example. When my kids were little at Christmas time, I would get up, we would open their presents, then I'd go back to bed and sleep till 11, 12 o'clock. Why would I do that? Because Christmas was a trigger for me as a child.
I can
Brought
understand.
back all this stuff, right? And I've learned that. But here I am broken, even as a Christian, and not processing these things, not afraid, not even knowing how to process these things. So getting free is a process. Getting whole is a process. Becoming a strong, whole man in our identity is a process, and it has to be taught. You just don't wake up one morning and go, "By golly, I'm going to stand and do this, that, and that." And the problem is, even within the church, let me just one more story. When I first became a Christian, I was looking for a mentor. I was where, and finally I had mentors all through my Christian walk. Pastor Fred, Wayne Kendall, who I dedicated the Cosmic Chess Match to. Dr. I.D.E. Thomas' book changed my life. And even though, we only met maybe, I don't know, a dozen times like that before he passed away, he was a mentor.
Sure.
And the reason why I'm doing Trail of the Nephilim and all this other stuff is because Dr. I.D.E. Thomas, he was a mentor. There's no doubt about it. And now at 75, I realize that I'm starting to speak into other men's lives, who are 30, who are 40, who are in their 20s, and, saying, well, what about this? What about that? What do I do with this? And there's a certain amount of wisdom because I'm 75 years old, not because I'm so smart or great or so full of wisdom. Any wisdom I have is from the Lord. But I know things now that I didn't know then, and I wish I could go back and change them. Let me bring up something. I was at Woodstock, 1969. I was 18 years old. Okay. I was at Woodstock, and Woodstock was the culmination of the neo-feminist movement.
Yep.
It was the culmination of the hippie movement and everything else. There was free love, free drugs, free everything that you wanted. You could, and the women didn't care. I mean, multiple partners, multiple sexual encounters. I mean, whatever, and here's the deal. Now it's Burning Man. Nothing has changed. People are still groping. They're still searching, looking for meaning. And many of these men and women come from, I can't tell you how many letters I get from people. There's a friend of ours who does a deliverance ministry in Oklahoma, Everett Cox, and it's deliverance, and they do deliverance. And I get like a report every week from them. And you hear things like, I was abused by my mother, there was never any love in the household. My father left us when I was 3 years old. You hear this over and over and over and over again. These people are so broken. They are so wounded. And the church needs to, and many of the churches do. Thank God for that. But, guys, if you're out there and you're in your 60s or 70s, it's time for you to start mentoring people. It really is.
That's true.
It's time for you to start mentoring the people who are 20 and 30, who are looking for guidance in their lives.
Scripture says that you have many teachers, but few fathers. And every one you mentioned who is a mentor to you is acting as a father to you. And every man that God used, every man or person, it doesn't even have to be gender specific, but any man or person that God used to mentor you is acting like a father. And what a father does is he helps a child, or a younger person, could be a younger person in age, but from God's perspective, all of us are his children. It helps his children reach their calling and destiny, because that's what the enemy wants to steal, kill, and destroy their calling and destinies. And fathers are used by God to bring out our calling and destinies. Every mentor you had helped you along the way to reach your calling and destiny. And that's a lot of what this show is about, by the way, is explaining this to people, to find people who could be father-like person to you, that God wants you. And you can't force that. I can't be a father-like person to somebody I meet on the street. It has to be a God connection for that to happen. It can't be made up. It can't be forced upon anything. It has to happen almost like naturally, which is really saying it has to happen supernaturally to have that connection. Because everything you said before is that you're 75 years old, that you have wisdom, but you don't have any wisdom like on your own. You said it came from above, which means that that your wisdom is revelation. For you to understand something, for you to receive wisdom from God, any of us to receive wisdom from God, it's a revelation to us, and God's teaching us. So we could turn around and say, I wish I had known that 30, 40 years ago. I feel the same way. It's interesting, some of the parallelisms. I'm 73 years old. I've been married for 45 years. I got 6 kids, 16 grandchildren. When I was 18, I was the oldest of 8 children in an Irish Catholic family. Born in Brooklyn, grew up on Long Island. My family moved out to St. Louis, Missouri. When I was 18 years old, I was on my way to college. And we had a dysfunctional family. My father was an alcoholic, and he had these different addictions. I won't tell you all of them. In any case, I knew it was dysfunctional. I couldn't figure out what it was, but I knew it wasn't right. So I lined up my brothers and sisters, my 7 brothers and sisters, and my mother and father. I lined them up in the kitchen. I gave them a kiss goodbye and say, I'm off to college. And I want to let you guys know, I love you all, but I'm never coming back. And my mother said to me, my wife said to me, I hope our children never say that. And I said, well, for me and my house, for me and my family, I knew I had to do that. I knew I had to break with it. I'm leaving and I'm never coming back. And I had a very good life in a lot of ways, but I knew it was right in some way. I had to find my own way. I ended up going to Georgetown University. I was a freshman there in 1970. And, it was that important to it. I mean, so you mentioned about all these people in the world that are broken. It's true. And they're broken primarily because the family's broken. I mean,
Absolutely.
the family's broken, even in the families that are the nuclear families. These are families that have husbands and wives. I mean, fathers and mothers. Fathers and mothers exist. Children exist. They're still dysfunctional. And out of their dysfunctionality, they're not based upon the word. And because they're dysfunctional, the children cannot be raised, as you said, because they're raised in broken homes and they themselves become broken. There's an expression that says, hurt people hurt people.
Amen. I mean,
And that's what we're seeing our society doing because of the breakdown of the family. And the enemy knew that from the very beginning.
The enemy knew it, and it's a construct. And, you get, who's the one that started Planned Parenthood? Margaret Sanger, right?
Margaret Sanger, yes.
And the reason why she started Planned Parenthood was to make sure that these lesser, and you want to talk racism? This is where it starts from, that the lesser races wouldn't procreate. That's where the abortion industry started.
Yes.
As a way of getting birth control to the inferior races.
Right.
And that's how it was couched. I might make this stuff up. But see, this stuff isn't taught in the schools. And so people have no idea of their history, no idea where we come from. Think about this, the Civil War, right? Think about what that did to the family structure. And this is what war does. Think about the people in World War I and World War II who never came back, the men that never came back.
Right.
Maybe they were married and the kids never saw their fathers. Think about the Vietnam War, where, they get married, they have a kid, and this guy goes over to Vietnam. He comes back, he's completely shattered, gets no help, doesn't know how to get any help, and he becomes an alcoholic or a drug addict or whatever, especially, you see where this thing goes? It's a snowball effect. What stands in the way is the church.
Yeah. We'll be back in a moment in the next segment, and we're going to continue talking about how this has developed. Okay. You're bringing up science.
Well, segment.
Pardon?
This is the last segment?
Yeah, last segment, 12 minutes. Okay, we're good?
Cool.
Okay.
Yep.
So, we're really unwrapping some interesting things here. And I want to go back into this racism thing. Because we talked about before, slavery's only been around for 150 years. In America, yes. But it's been around for thousands of years. But there was a big change. It happened in 1859. In 1859, Charles Darwin wrote The Origin of Species.
That's the pivotal moment. That
And I want to talk
changes
about
everything.
that because he's the first time ever that he took the human race and divided it up into 4 colors. And he says, white, yellow, red, black. And the worst was black because they were closest to the apes. He comes out and says this. I mean, I may be called racist if I say this, but I didn't say it. I'm telling you what Charles Darwin said. And Margaret Sanger picked up on that.
Absolutely.
He was the biggest fan of Margaret Sanger?
Adolf Hitler.
Adolf Hitler, exactly. The Aryan race. And it was all demonic. It is. And she comes up with this thing about eugenics. Let's talk about this in a second. So, we're talking with L.A. Marzulli, and we just left this last segment, and we were talking about the idea of racism and how the enemy has used that to break down the family. I wanted to mention something about the history of this. Most people don't realize, and we never taught this history. The history of it comes back. We've had slavery for thousands of years. Everybody who conquered another tribe, or they made them slaves. 2,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, everybody had slaves. The Egyptians had slaves, so on and so forth. In fact, there's slaves today in a lot of Muslim countries. That was in May. In the United States of America, there was a big shift that happened in 1859 when Charles Darwin wrote The Origin of Species. And for the first time ever, he took the human race, from God's point of view, human race is singular, because he says we're all of one blood. It says that in Scripture. All of one blood. The DNA is the same. He doesn't divide the human race into colors. But Charles Darwin, really inspired by demonic sources, divides the human race into 4 colors: white, yellow, red, and black. And the black was the most effective because it was closest to the apes. He comes right out and says this stuff. And who takes up on this? Margaret Sanger, right? And she's the author of like Planned Parenthood, her biggest fan, and they actually exchanged correspondence and letters between Margaret Sanger and Adolf Hitler. This is part of history to show this stuff. Hitler takes up on it because the white race was the epitome of the white race was the Aryan race, and he tries to support the dramatic aspect of the Aryan race, and these are the Supermen. Another demonic guy, Friedrich Nietzsche, was the guy who wrote the Superman, and he was anti-God. So Hitler was anti-God, Margaret Sanger was anti-God, Charles Darwin is anti-God. I mean, it goes on and on. The whole theory of evolution is trying to take God out of the picture as being the one who's the uncreated one who created everything, and think that we come from nothingness or an amoeba. You know, one person said to me one thing, it's logically impossible for evolution to be true. I said, how's that? He says, everything starts with order and moves to chaos. But Charles Darwin said it came from chaos and it went to order. Not possible, right? It's the opposite of the way things flow. So you can throw out evolution, Darwinism, so forth, but let's bring it back to the moment where we're living in the moment and how the effect of those thoughts through humanism that was also created and the effect of Margaret Sanger on Planned Parenthood, how that was used to destroy the family. I mean, we wouldn't have abortions today. 63 million people. They're saying over 1 billion babies were sacrificed worldwide, 1 billion, with the same philosophy that came out of Darwinism.
And people don't understand. I bag on this all the time. What does 1 billion people look like? So if I say 1 billion babies are destroyed, you know, I can't get my head around it. You can't get your head around it. That's a number that with too many zeros, there's no way. I mean, 50,000 people in a stadium. Okay, I got that. But 1 billion, I can't relate. Yes, you can. And I'll show you how you do it. If we hopped on a plane at the North Pole and we went over to Nome, Alaska, Toronto, Canada, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., Mexico City, went all the way down Central America. We hit Lima, Peru. Then we jumped down over to Brazil, and we went down to Tierra del Fuego. We went from the North Pole to the southernmost part in our hemisphere, Tierra del Fuego. You would not see one person. Do you understand that? Not one person. That's 1 billion people. 1 billion people. So from the North Pole, all of North America, Central America, South America, everybody's gone. That's 1 billion people. That's what it looks like. That's 1 billion with a B people. You don't think that has opened up the gates of hell? You don't think that we're praying against the brass heaven in some ways? Because those are sacrifices to Moloch. Whether that blood sacrifice, because that's what it is, and every single abortion, that changes everything. That's allowed the enemy, in my humble opinion, that's allowed the enemy to manifest in ways that we've never seen. And what we see is a you know, I've asked this question at conferences. We see the deconstruction of society. I ask people, how many people think we're better off now in 2025 than we were in 1999? Anybody? Never a hand goes up, Tom. Never a hand.
You know, we were talking before about last second, we mentioned Jonathan Collins' book about the avatars. We said even Hitler could be considered an avatar because he's possessed.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
We could also put people into that category like Margaret Sanger. But these people are possessed in a sense. Distributing ideas. They're like not thought police. What do you call them? Thought shapers of evil. Thought shapers of evil. Darwin was a person like that. In fact, I think Darwin was anti-God. I think he was raised in a Protestant world, but
yeah, he was
turned against it. And in his turning against it, I believe he turned towards the demonic side, the dark side. And a lot of these thoughts and ideas that came through him were possibly written for him, or at least delivered to him to present in his works. And it's amazing that in our educational system, we talk about these things as facts.
And let me just weigh in on that. A friend had children and they sent them off to college. And by the end of the first semester, they had rejected their Christian faith. They embraced the Darwinian paradigm and everything that goes with it. So they're not, and this is what I take great umbrage with, because Darwinism runs the planet. It runs the scientific community. It runs the medical community. It runs academia. Darwinism is sacrosanct in those three bastions of
Influence.
of influence. It's there. If you're not a Darwinist, good luck trying to get a job at a museum. It's got to change. We have a petition that we signed. It was supposed to go up to D.C. I think it's sitting on somebody's desk and it hasn't moved, but I digress. But I mean, we had like close to 3,000 signatures on it. Not a lot, but something demanding transparency in the museums. We don't have that. Let me just show you something. This is at the Field Museum. This comes from, shameless plug, the huge tome On the Trail of the Nephilim. Makes a great paperweight. So years ago, I visited the Field Museum, and this is what it says. This is a mural, probably 20 feet wide or 25 feet wide. Can you read that, Tom?
It says, how this author sidebar, from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful have been and are being evolved. Charles Darwin. Yeah, I can read it.
I mean, there you go. And that's the truth. That's what they're trying to say. And this is being promulgated in a public museum as truth. Well, that's your truth. That's your religion, and you're being funded by taxpayer dollars. And many Christians have had it up to here with all this nonsense. When I walk in and I see that, I take great umbrage in that. I'm really bothered by that, because you're promulgating something which is nothing more than a theory. It's never been proven. And now the neo-Darwinists look at the original Charlie Darwin nonsense, and with the knowledge of the DNA molecular structure, they realize, no, this didn't pop out of some primordial slime someplace. There had to be a creator. And this is why Ben Stein's, film is so important. Expelled, no intelligence allowed. He sits down with one of the premier evolutionists of the 21st century, Richard Dawkins, and he goes, well, how do you think it started? And Dawkins goes, well, we don't know. He's very effete, very aloof. How dare you question me? But he has no idea where any of it started. And then he goes, well, it could have happened this way. A race of advanced extraterrestrials could have seeded us here and genetically manipulated us. I mean, if I hear it one more time, I'm going to scream. That's called.
Where did he get that idea from?
Yeah, well, where did they come from? Seriously? How about in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. He was with God in the beginning. All things were made through him, with him, and without him was not made anything that was made. He was the life. The life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. Well, why should we believe that? Because we have prophecy in the Bible. And prophecy means that there's someone outside space-time as we know it, calling out the end before the beginning and the beginning before the end with great specificity. Gee, I wonder who that is. Maybe it's God. Just maybe it's God that can do that. Because there's only one book on this planet, and that's the Judeo-Christian Bible. And many of those prophecies that were written have not been fulfilled yet. Many of them have not been fulfilled. Folks, we could be in a window of time where we're looking at the fulfillment of those prophecies. Not taught in the churches for the most part. Most churches are all millennial. Most churches are anti-prophetic. You never hear a word about prophecy. But it's there.
It's
shame on us for not following.
That's true. I mean, everything you're saying is true. And the thing that I had a conversation with the Lord once about the Bible I've read, the end of it, I know we win. I said, could you give me a mathematical, a firm mathematical basis of why I can prove that it's true? God said to me, whether it's going to happen. And God says, it's going to happen because it's true. He says, the only thing that's sustainable is truth. Anything that's a lie is not sustainable. So when Darwin prints out what he's printing out, Darwinism, it's a lie. And it cannot be, they've been trying to stay, they've been propping it up for 150 years, but it's not sustainable in eternity. It can't go on for eternity. It can't go on forever. Communism can't go on forever. Anything that's a lie, anything that's coming out of the Antichrist spirit, the anti-God, Antichrist spirit is a lie, and it has to collapse. It can't survive on its own. And so one of the things we want to really look forward and pray into is the return of the fathers. Because I really believe that fathers, like yourself, by the way, you're a father. You have a father's heart. And people that I come in contact with, God's calling them to his name, and they can only come through one place, the way and the truth of life, which is the Lord Jesus. But the desire to have a father, if you want to know your calling and destiny, only your father can tell you that. And unless you have a relationship with God the Father, you'll never find out your calling and destiny. It's true. You'll remain a broken person, and you'll bounce all around. But God's calling that out, and he's calling home the fathers. The whole earth groans, waiting for the revelation of the sons of God. These are the ones that have a father's heart. We thank you, LA, for joining us, and we'll be back for part 3. Take care.
Folks, Prophecy Watchers Conference is coming up. I will be speaking there. ProphecyWatchers.com, ProphecyWatchers.com. Don't forget, sign up for the live streaming. What the heck are you waiting for? Sign up for the live streaming. Go to ProphecyWatchers.com. You can watch all the speakers live, and it's really the way to go because, I get it. If you're close and you want to drive in, rent a hotel room, food on the road, that's great. And some people do that. And we thank you that a lot of people do. But what if you live in Connecticut and you don't really feel like flying into Oklahoma and Norman, Oklahoma? I get that. Sign up for the live streaming. Bada bing. Here you go. East Coast verbiage, right? Or if you're in New York City, bada bing, bada boom. So you can watch the whole thing right from the comfort of your living room, feet up on your favorite hassock and footstool. Honey, can I have some more popcorn? Can you bring me a ham and cheese sandwich? I mean, I'm being facetious here, but you get my drift. ProphecyWatchers.com, ProphecyWatchers.com. Anyway, folks, we'll be back again tomorrow with another show. Remember, don't wait for YouTube to send you a notification. We're here every day. If news breaks, I'm in my studio weighing in on. Thanks so much for watching. I am your intrepid host, L.A. Marzulli.